Hello and welcome to another episode of Pakistonomy. The COVID-19 pandemic is still going on, and around the world, it has shut down schools and colleges, including Pakistan, and put really impacting the education sector severely, increasing the need for technology-led solutions that increase access to education during these uncertain times. To talk about this topic and edtech in general, I am joined by Annum Sadiq. Annum is an old friend. We actually went to high school together, and we were just talking about before I hit record that it's been a while since we caught up. She's the co founder and chief education officer at Edkasa, a startup whose mission is to provide easy access to quality education to Pakistan's youth. Annum, welcome to Pakistonomy.
Thank you, Uzair. Thanks for having me.
The stats are really stark in Pakistan, right? Like 23 million Pakistanis children out
Yeah.
of school. About half of those that do attend school actually fail the annual board exams, and that's
Yeah.
really the why at CASA was set up. So I want you to share with us a bit about the vision and the mission of the company, and
Yeah.
how are things going in these uncertain times given coronavirus, and how have you or thought about impacting the education sector in Pakistan?
Yeah, Uzair, you actually, the stats that you've opened with is something that would keep me up at night. You know, the fact that there are 22 million out of school children in Pakistan, the second highest in the world. And sadly, those who are going to school, a lot of them are unable to graduate. And if you're not graduating from high school, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade, then really what becomes of you? Because now it's a knowledge based economy. I mean, that's how the world is competing and moving forward. So as an educator, I've been about in the education space for about 10 years. I've tried to look at the educational challenge from different perspectives, working in different jobs with different organizations. And I felt like there was no comprehensive solution that was being presented to this huge problem. There were a lot of people trying to work and trying to work together as well, but it just never would. I felt like the gap was too wide. So how Edkasa kind of came about was that I was in the United States, and the other two co-founders of Edkasa, Fahad Tanveer, who's also my husband, and Sohail Ali, he's also a graduate from the US. The three of us had sort of returned to Pakistan, pursuing different degrees, and really relying on the education that we had gained. I went to Carnegie Mellon and studied public policy. Fahad was at Harvard, and he was studying finance. Sohail was at MIT, and his core focus was more towards strategy. So the three of us sort of met, and it was a coincidence that ran into Sohail at a education event, and we were basically mentoring other students on what to study and sort of how to take their careers forward. And it was a turning point for the three of us because we met and it was like-minded. The discussion where we discussed how big the education problem was and how we felt that tech was a solution to it. So in Pakistan, the way the technology is being driven forward and the consumption and the uptake of technology is really quite interesting to notice. Month on month, the number of users are increasing. Social media uptake is really going up. And the best part is that mobile penetration and 4G penetration is increasing. And I think GSMA just recently put out a report that 80% of there's 80% coverage of 4G internet right now in Pakistan by the end of this year. So they're really reassuring facts somewhat, with the progress that technology is making in the country. So we felt like this could really leapfrog, just the use of technology could really leapfrog traditional constraints that education sector has faced. Right now, we don't have enough schools. It's a huge problem, especially girls' schools. They're very few and far out. And a lot of girls you see are not able to pursue their education because it's really hard for them to, travel long distances and go to other schools. So technology can leapfrog that constraint that comes with physical buildings. And then secondly, teaching 22 million students would require an army of teachers, right? So where do you get these teachers from to teach all of these kids? And there are a lot of issues right now around teacher training, around teacher retention, around quality of teachers. There's so much data which shows that learning outcomes are not what they should be. Year on year, you see from USAID reports and LEAP reports about how a child in for example fifth grade is unable to do math that's of second or third grader. So all of these causes, all of these things, as an educator would really stand out, and I wanted to do something meaningful in this area and try my best to bridge this gap. So like I was lucky we found each other, all of us co-founders, and then we sort of built a team. And one by one, it was like a catalyst to reaction. We started with Edkasa. We got into some really good partnerships with different donor organizations, and we got some really good clients who understood what we were doing. I did feel like at that time we were kind of ahead of our time, because it took some time for people to understand how edtech works, and there were a lot of questions around it. But we would always start with a small pilot. We'd always go to a school and say, okay, give us a chance, let us show what we've got, and every time that school would give us more schools to work with, and so our network sort of developed. We started with 3 schools at the start of 2019. And right now we're at about 40 schools that we're working with. We're reaching about 75,000 students. So sorry, I'd actually like to just clarify Edkasa's how we reach these students. So one part of it is that we work with schools, as I mentioned. So what we do is that we um, do live streaming of classes, and we focus specifically on STEM, because that's where it's really hard to find quality teachers, especially in rural areas and in higher grades. So what we go to a school, we say, okay, it's hard for you to find these teachers, so you can outsource the teaching of these STEM subjects to us. We're going to conduct the teaching, we're going to do the testing, we're going to give you reports, and we'll make sure that the student is equipped to be able to graduate from high school, to be able to pass their board intermediate exam, because that's where the problem lies. So we reach out directly to schools, and then we also, for students who have access to smartphones, they can watch a live classes from the comfort of their home using mobile technology.
That's interesting. And so, one of the things when you said it's hard to convince, I was thinking immediately like, okay, you're gonna tell teachers that we're gonna put students in front of a screen and teach them, and
Yeah.
probably that I'm assuming that that was a pushback that you must have received. But again, you need innovative methods, and something that, for example, the Prime Minister of Pakistan talks about, that there's a divide in education in Pakistan, which he has a point about, between the elite and non-elite. But
Hmm.
it's also more sophisticated and more complicated than that, right? There are cultural barriers, language barriers. So how
Yeah.
does Edkasa go about coming up with the right innovative solutions to bridge these barriers and make sure that the outcomes are achieved?
Yeah, it's a great question, Uzair, and yeah, definitely in Pakistani society we are stratified along gender, along economic lines, and so on. So there is that, but the thing is that I think it's a myth to say that technology is just reserved for the elite. As I mentioned, we work with schools that actually are at the sort of lowest end, at the bottom of the pyramid, so to speak.
And sorry to
These are the
interrupt. These
students.
are
Sure.
these are government schools or private or a bit of both?
It's a bit of both.
Both.
So we work with schools basically that either an NGO would run, or a very low cost private school which would charge about 1,000 rupees per student for the entire month. So we're working with students really at the bottom of the pyramid, and the uptake for them it's been really exciting. Like for them, they've heard of how technology is being used in more expensive schools, and they're very welcoming to a new innovation in their area, and the word of mouth really gets around. So actually, what you've got to do is look at the need, sort of look at this user, right? Like we were very clear as a social impact company that we want to go to the bottom of the pyramid. There is a large volume there. Sure, the cost, the transaction of the sort of what would you say, the price tag associated has to be very reasonable so that it's affordable for them. But the need really lies with that user, because that user is the one who doesn't have a school. That user is the one who doesn't have qualified teachers to teach them. That is the user who's failing their exam. So what we did before we started at CASA was, when the idea was just in our mind, we did about 800 household surveys to really understand what the pain points were. We knew all of this data about students not going to school, but who are these students? What are their constraints? What does their family life look like? How can we incentivize them to study? And then students who are failing, why are they failing? What is the exact problem? What can we do? How do we build in a human-centered design into EdCasa system? So coming back to that sort of stratification along the lines of income. So what I'm trying to say is that our B2B solution, which was working with schools, was actually designed for students at the bottom of the pyramid. It has great economies of scale, where what happens is that a teacher, we hire an amazing teacher, right? Like the kind of teacher who goes to the most expensive private school, and then we do a training with them on online teaching approaches. We get them up to that par, and then they are able to teach hundreds of students at the same time. That means that individual user costs would decrease, making it affordable for that user, and giving them, bridging that sort of gap that they had. And from the business side, it makes sense as well, right? Because you're playing on volume. Now, the question associated comes that how do you manage a class size that is bigger? So for that, there are lots of best practices that we've looked at. We've worked with the University of Madison, Wisconsin, to design an amazing teacher training program and design sort of different components in online teaching to ensure that outcomes are being met, that we want. For us, there's laser focus on improving their grades and making them do well in their examinations. So we've incorporated all of that, and the West has been doing online teaching for a very long time now, right? So I've also worked with the Chelsea Public School District. Fahad has also taught online in the US. So we brought all of that experience with us and felt like this was something that was ready to hit the Pakistani market and then really scale up.
That's fascinating. So the survey, I just was curious. You did the survey. What were some of the interesting things or surprising things that you saw from that
Yeah,
data that you collected?
yeah. I think one of the things that still I recall a lot and I tell my teachers is that when we ask students what was the biggest sort of problem in the education system right now, Uzair, do you want to guess what it was and what they felt that needed addressing most?
I'm guessing the quality of the way the teacher communicated with them and how they treated them.
Yeah, yeah. It was a lot to do with that. That they felt that the teacher was not respectful. That they felt that the teacher was rude, and they were just not motivated to come to that class and deal with the kind of environment. So for me as an educator, I always thought that it was a lack of skill set in terms of technical expertise. Like a teacher might not be a subject specialist, or the teacher might not know how to, teach something technical. But actually, it just came down to their communication and them being respectful and them harnessing a relationship, because education is a relationship. So I think that was a very interesting insight I got. The second thing was actually seeing how much people are spending in education. I mean, your grade 9 to grade 12, 90% of these students are taking tuitions, it's a
Hmm.
huge market. So I think that was very interesting also to see how much money is actually
And
being spent.
sorry again. So the household survey, because your target market is sort of at the bottom of the pyramid, I would assume that tuition expenditure would be high for like elite schools and elite society members. But
Yeah,
these are people who would go to that 1,000 rupee a month, 1,500 rupee a month. Even they, you're saying from the data you
yeah,
collected, were spending
yeah.
inordinate amounts of money outside of school for their child's education.
Yeah, absolutely. Like
Wow.
we chose our sample very carefully, and it was all across SEC A to SEC D. And even in SECC, for example, you were getting students spending 3,000 rupees a month on tuitions on average.
And
But was there one thing?
SEC A to D are like socioeconomic classes, right? Just
Yeah,
for the person who does not know, these are
absolutely,
A being the highest
absolutely.
and D being the lowest.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But here is a caveat in all of this, that we are looking at students who are grade 9 to grade 12. The dropout is very wide at the grade 8 level, and then even between primary and secondary school. So a student who's committed to the point of being in grade 9 is more likely to spend more, is more likely to have crossed a lot more barriers than the other counterparts who've left
Okay.
education at the primary stage.
And was there like even with that data? So that's interesting. And I just for full disclosure, you did not share this data with me, so I was just having a guess of mine in terms of what the issue was because I look back
Yeah,
and we went to school together, right? Like I look back at teachers, even in a private school that we went to. The ones that I personally liked the most were the teachers who may not know everything, may not be the smartest
yeah,
teacher, quote unquote, but they were the most
yeah,
respectful and the most engaging and knew how to communicate, not just with me as a student, but they knew the personalities of each student and sort of tailored their approach based on who in the classroom was struggling at that point in time. And that was always an issue, even when I
yeah.
look back. Um, but coming back to the survey, was there a difference across genders that you also saw in terms of what the issues were? Given that
Yeah.
in Pakistan, women's education is such continues to be such a big problem, and girls' education remains, as you said, parents are unwilling to send their girls for long distances to schools, etc. So, did you find anything interesting that cut across gender in the survey?
Yeah, was there absolutely just things that you mentioned. For a woman, for a girl, adolescent girl especially, it would be very hard for her to commute. So a brother or a father would need to chaperone her, as opposed to a boy who could just take care of his own commute and just be at the academy or be at the school, etc., on his own. So that significantly would hinder a girl's access to education. And the second thing that stood in their way was household chores. So girl was expected to do a lot more household tasks. So she needed more flexibility in how she manages her routine. But the motivation was really quite there. Like it's amazing. We work with a lot of girls' schools now, with especially with our connected classrooms model, the B2B model. We've really focused on girls' schools because that's where it's again really hard to get you know we basically what happens is that girls drop out, and then we work with a partner, get those girls back into school, and then tell them to convert a secondary school into a high school, and Edkasa sort of takes over the high school part of it all. So the motivation girls have is amazing. They're really intrinsically motivated to study, and they form a relationship with the teacher also really well and really fast. So yeah, even at the survey, those kind of indications were there that girls are really intrinsically motivated to study, but because of household chores and cultural restrictions, it's harder for them. The access issue is way more pronounced for girls than it is for boys.
And at the beginning, you mentioned, that when the three of you came together and wanted to solve this problem. Now that when you look back, and it's still you're very early on in your journey, like what is one interesting success or major success that you look back and say, wow, we didn't think we would be this good at this, that comes to your mind? And also at the same moment, like what are some areas that you still think Edkasa as a company needs to improve on?
Yeah. So, Uzair, in terms of traction, we have about 40 schools that we're working with right now. We have about 72,000 users, some of them from these schools, but most of them from our B2C version. We've got a YouTube channel where we have about 800 free videos of different concepts that students can watch and learn from, and they're geared towards the exams. So when I look at this community and the closeness of this community, that makes me really happy. Like when I look at how students are interacting with the content and gaining from it, it just makes me feel validated because we started this with a very social cause. We are a private limited company because we wanted this company to be sustainable and to grow and really address the needs that the user had. But we always did this with the vision of um, you know for us, education is sort of the biggest bridge between the world that we have and the world that we want. So when we see that education being, helping students, empowering them, we feel that we're closer in creating the world that we sort of idealize in our mind. And that has been a great uh, validation for me. We get a lot of user testimonials. If you just go on the YouTube and you sort of just scroll down on the videos and see the comments people are making, it really can, as a co-founder, really sort of cheer you up. And then the stickiness of it, right? So for the in the B2C as well and the B2B, where customers are actually paying us, 90% of them, once they start a paying relationship with us, do actually stay on board and continue that process. So that's just to see your community grow and to see that you put in that effort, and now in years 2 years you're seeing the benefits of that has been very rewarding. In terms of improvement, I do feel that there needs to be more awareness around online education. The users need to also be trained in how to be online learners, right? So there's a fair amount of responsibility that comes on a student when they're online learners as opposed to when they're sitting in a classroom. So just conveying your expectation as an online educator, that what you need from the student and what the student can expect from you. I think there needs to be more awareness around that. So second thing. Third thing, I would say that I think our user experience should be improved. We are working on that. We are working on having a dedicated app where the user gets a customized journey. That's sort of the power of online learning, where you can really differentiate your instruction according to a student's level. Like for example, was there in high school, everybody would get the same test, right? Like the teacher couldn't really create 50 versions of the test, to cater to your need and your learning level. But in online education, you can do that. It can be dynamic, and it can be the question set, the question bank, the instruction can really be tailored to a user's level. So we're really trying to do that, create customized journeys and cater to that student. Another thing I would say that I want to improve, although I feel like we have really kept this at the ethos of the company, is that education is a relationship. So at all times, the teacher, should be available to the student, even if it's an online setting. And the student should look at the teacher as a role model and as a mentor as well, because that, and especially at that age of high school where you're deciding your subjects, you're deciding, university paths and then career and so on, they need a lot of handholding and guidance. So I think we need to also do that more. We do that, but I want to accelerate that.
Yeah, the customer journey part is interesting, right? Because you can, if you have the app or if you're tracking where a student is spending more time or going back
Yeah,
on a video and, trying to understand a concept, if you can customize what they then see because they may be struggling with something or are not getting a particular concept, and you provide them with the right prompts to make sure that they get that, or if they in the quizzes are struggling with a particular topic, then you recommend that they go back and look at something else, can be really powerful, right? Because I agree, like when you're in the analog classroom, or when I
yeah,
was in an analog classroom, like the teacher did not know what I was not getting, and they just move on because they have 45 minutes to get through a certain class or a certain topic. And you get it. If you don't get it, maybe go to a tuition and ask someone or a private tutor, and
yeah,
maybe they may not even know what you're not getting and why you're not getting, right? So that's the power of technologies. By
yeah,
collecting that data, you can
yeah,
really customize things and make sure
yeah,
people get topics that they may not otherwise be struggling to get. Um, in recent weeks and months, right, when schools were shut down, the government started focusing more on distance learning. We saw PTV have educational shows, etc. How do you see the policy environment in Pakistan? I want to start with on the education side and what's going on and what
yeah,
more. I know you mentioned that having more awareness on distance learning and education would be interesting. But what are other areas where you see the government should lean in and catalyze change? And then I want
yeah,
to get to the digital divide, but let's first start here in terms of how you saw the change happen from the government side in recent months.
yeah. I think the government has been fairly keen on trying out technology solutions. Even before COVID, we were in talks with the federal minister. He visited our office. A lot of sort of back and forth on how the government and even a startup like us could collaborate and work together. So there was always an appetite the government showed. But the pace at which things could move has always been, something that needs to happen faster. And another thing is that I feel, in terms of policy, the public private partnership requires structural change in procurement policies that the government has. So, the KP government, for example, would be working with online educators from abroad. They're doing quite a few of bringing solutions on technical training in their classrooms in KP, and there's some really good initiatives that they're taking. But why can't Pakistani startups or Pakistani online educators be part of that pool?
Hmm.
They should also sort of have a made in Pakistan. Like there were some talks that they're going to do something like that, but when are we going to see that happening? Them picking up Pakistani companies and taking them forward, because there's a lot of innovation. Like look at COVID time, right? Who are the companies that have been most innovative, who have been able to rise to this occasion and serve the demand? It's mostly been companies that are new, that are find it easier to pivot and have been bringing in new solutions. But how much uptake has the government or other people shown to these companies? That I don't know how there's definitely been an increase in demand even for Edkasa, like three times the users that we have now. Before March, now we have three times those users, twice as likely to engage, and the engagement levels have increased, and it's been phenomenal, the acceleration of edtech. But in terms of um, the big people pivoting and the government sort of working with them, I feel like the procurement patterns really systematically should allow for startups to bid for government RFPs and so on. So I think that's a big thing, and I think a provision of internet that the government can really help out there. I think the telcos have shown an appetite, and the telcos have, like for example, Telenor and Edkasa have formed a partnership. We just recently signed an MOU with them, and they were very forthcoming with how they wanted to bring out edtech in a big way. And they're looking at really reducing the data cost to almost making it zero rated, and we're talking different back and forth about what can be done. But that's the need of the hour. And we really hope to see government making policies to ensure that data is extremely cheap, because it actually is going to really help with the job creation element as well. Like if you look at reports right now, the people in knowledge based work, for them there's a huge acceleration, but for all other businesses it's not like that. So if there's internet and people can a gather those skills and b use the internet to do their businesses, it's going to be good for the economy. So I think there's a massive need to look into provision of data, and then also data security and um, protection while using data responsibly and so on.
Yeah, the digital divide part is interesting, and it's you said that there is 80% 4G coverage in Pakistan, but if you look at
Yeah,
even Pakistan among its peers in the region, barring Afghanistan, it trails them, right, in terms of 4G adoption, smartphone adoption, um, and even in terms of the tax environment for telecoms and data. Like I
yeah,
personally, I mean, I understand why the government has found it easy to tax cell phones and your data plans and your internet plans, because
yeah,
there are only so few avenues they have available to raise that money. So it's an easy solution, but it hampers growth, right? And
yeah,
I had my guest last week when we were talking about the informal economy. That's what we were talking about, was the government at some point needs to shift away from a tax-led approach to a growth-led approach, because you the freelancer, right? If you're going to tax their internet, it's going to make them less competitive when
yeah,
coding and bidding on Upstart or Upwork.com or whatever. And that you need to think about on the education lens as well, that if the goal is to enhance access through technology, then why are we
yeah,
taxing technology solutions so much? Why is internet so expensive, etc.? So I mean, that brings me to my second part of this divide question: is there is still a digital divide in Pakistan, right? Particularly at the bottom of the pyramid that you're targeting,
yeah.
in terms of feature phones, access to laptops, and things like that. How have you sort of navigated that divide, particularly in rural settings, and what has worked and what hasn't worked in terms of making sure that these schools, these children have the right hardware or the technology and internet access that is needed for you to deliver the experience that you want to deliver to them?
Yeah. So then I can talk about what how we pivoted, because I mentioned that we're working with a lot of schools, and just around about the time of the board intermediate exams, this Corona pandemic hit. There was a lot of stress that the students were facing because the government didn't make it entirely clear what was going to happen. So the students really needed a solution at that time, and they needed a teacher to sort of talk to and revise their course, because they weren't sure if the exams are going to happen or not. So what we did was that we had all the data of these students who were in these 40 schools, and we conducted a comprehensive survey of all of them, asking them availability of smartphones, not ownership, but availability in a household, and then the availability of internet, and so on. So we found out that even with the students that we work on, a bunch of them are coming from families that belong to daily laborers, who have like one household member earning and have big families, and really looking at a bottom of pyramid. A lot of our schools are in South Punjab. So they're in Muzaffargarh, Bahawalpur, Rahim Yar Khan. So I'm really talking about districts where there is poverty, and there is, um, the Corona pandemic has hit them in economically. So we spoke with these students, and it turned out that about in some areas 50% and in some areas 60% students had access to smartphones, and they had access to the internet as well. We work with telcos to provide extremely subsidized rates, and some of the clients that we work with also footed in bills for these internet, and it was coming out to be 300 rupees per student per month for the internet cost, where the student could get access to our classes on a daily basis. So immediately it was very easy to serve these students who had access to smartphones, and then just solve for the internet issue, and you're good to go, because then your classes can be streamed from their homes, and they can continue their revision as they were. Now those students who didn't have access to smartphones, that was a bigger problem to solve, and clearly there is a need for these older students. I'm not propagating for the younger ones so much, because I understand that e-learning looks very differently for them, and their needs in education are very different from the needs of a high school student who's preparing for exam. But there is a need for these students, the high school ones preparing for their exams, to have internet access, to have, learn. There's a lot more learning that you can do if you are online and you have a device. So there is need to provide these devices to them, but they didn't have these devices. So what we did was that we started a worksheet and SMS-based campaign with them, where we would give them these question banks, and sort of hold them accountable to submit it to their school, who would then sort of post them to us for us to check and curate that. and keep the students accountable at all times. So we sort of improvised and did this two-phase thing, which was one was using smartphones and the other was using SMSs, because everybody did have dumb phones. So it was easy to reach them through SMS. So that's how we pivoted. But moving forward, I mean, I'm seeing all these news about World Bank giving government funding to make technology solutions accessible to students. So I'm hoping to see a change, in availability of tablets and cheaper solution devices that these students can benefit from then.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about, like, even the fact that initially you said, right, a lot of these kids go outside of school for learning. So there is a pot of money that their family sets aside on top of the schooling fees, if they're paying that, to educate them even better and have a tutor, for
Yeah,
example. You said there are 90% is your retention rate when people join the
yeah,
program and start using it. So maybe there is an opportunity for telcos, like the way they've done in Africa, for example, of having paper day phones, right? Because in my
yeah,
mind, the barrier for the family in South Punjab is not that they don't have the daily amount of money to pay for a phone. It's that they may not have 10,000 or 15,000 or 20,000 rupees as a chunk to put
yeah,
forward into a phone that can then help their child have a better education. So again, there are innovative ways of enabling access through financing.
yeah,
And I think that's where, in one area where Pakistan, for example, has lagged behind, is we haven't been financially inclusive at the bottom of the pyramid, which
yeah,
then you were solves a lot of problems, because I'm sure that a lot of the bottom of the pyramid folks who can put aside 20-50 rupees a day, that gives them access to data plus a phone that is not even a smartphone, could be a feature phone, so it's not fully dumb. That then enhances everything that child can do on that phone and have a better education, right? So I think creative solutions are needed, and parts of Africa, India, Bangladesh are already testing that out. So one can hope that
yeah,
Pakistan follows suit, because it does lag behind even some
yeah.
sub-Saharan African countries, right, in that segment. I
Agreed.
want to pivot a bit to your own personal experiences as an entrepreneur. And you're a Fulbright scholar, moved back to Pakistan a few years ago. What has that journey been like for you? First spending time in the United States, then taking those lessons learned, coming back to Pakistan, and now being a female entrepreneur.
So for me, the Fulbright, why I wanted to go and pursue my degree was basically to look at solutions in education for Pakistan. So it was very clear. The focus was very clear for me. I didn't know if I was going to be an entrepreneur or not. I just knew that I wanted to be a part of the solution in some way or the other. I used to work with the World Bank Reform Program with the Punjab government. I used to work with before that. I used to work with USAID on technical training and so on. So I looked at the education problem from a multi-stakeholder lens, and really what I needed to learn when I applied for my Fulbright was technology and scalability, and that's why I went to the school, Carnegie Mellon, because the data, technology, robotics, all of that is really
Which,
that's the
sorry to
skill set I was
interrupt,
missing.
for those listening, Carnegie Mellon's tech programs are so amazing that, in fact, Uber, when it was setting up its driverless program, basically bought out their entire lab. So just wanted to provide that context about how great that school's technology focus is.
Absolutely. Like there, they were talking about hyperloops, and Elon Musk was coming on campus, and you saw these things being built in front of you. So I think the first thing when I came back to Pakistan was, have we like when are we going to catch up with all the innovation that's happening? When are we going to expose ourselves? I felt like there was an exposure problem as well, where people were, you know, solving problems in a very traditional way to things that really have now people abroad have found solutions for, that you can actually, I'm not saying copy paste, but you can sort of draw inspiration from. But anyway, I was mentioning that when I applied for my Fulbright, I was very clear on what I wanted to do. So the coming back to Pakistan was a no-brainer for me. I always wanted to do that. The entrepreneurship was actually not something I had thought about. That's something I stumbled upon. My husband, he always wanted to do something of his own, and he came from that mindset of building something of his own. So he started thinking along these lines, and it was clear he wants to be an entrepreneur when he heads back. So when we decided on starting Edkasa, on really working in edtech, that's when I got really interested, because I felt like this really could solve a bunch of problems for the country. So that's where I got pulled into the entrepreneurship space, and I haven't looked back. It's been 3 years since I've been dedicated to Edkasa, working full time, and it's been a steep learning curve even for me, the entrepreneurship journey. One thing I didn't expect was that the kind of resilience it requires, because at the end of the day, if you're doing a job, you can come back and your problem and your job's problem can be kind of separated. But with entrepreneurship, the company becomes you literally think of it as your baby, and everything is, you just want to go and tackle every problem on your own. So it requires a lot of resilience, but also self-discipline, because you don't want to constantly just get overworked and burn yourself out. So yeah, but actually it's been the most rewarding thing I've ever done so far, because you've like for me it was really problematic to see how the crisis in education was being handled, and the fact that I felt like I couldn't do more. But here with Edkasa, I feel like I can do more. Like I can push harder, I can form better partnerships, and I can scale. Like I think with technology, anybody who's working in technology knows it's hyper scalable. So that's something that's really exciting for me.
No, that's fascinating, and I mean, it is. You're right about the fact that when you're in a job, basically you can come home at 5, 6, 7 p.m. and turn off the phone or ignore the phone, because if the emails
Yeah,
come, they come, like whatever. But in this case, you are the person writing the email to yourself in your head and responding to it even when you're home, right? So the discipline becomes very important, and developing those barriers that say, okay, this is work
yeah,
time, this is not work time, is very important. um, as a female entrepreneur, though, I think one of the
yeah,
things that I continue to see, whether it's on social media, when I read government reports, is that there is a gender divide in Pakistan in education, as we talked about, but also in terms of achievement or entrepreneurship or being in positions of leadership, right? You're a chief education officer at a startup. How has that been, like, given the way Pakistani society has is structured, and you are dealing in a sector at the bottom of the pyramid that perhaps has more barriers to women playing a leading role. And so what has that experience been like for you as an entrepreneur?
yeah. So there are like multiple um, um, facets to this, I felt. One is like when you're talking to an investor, there's a very different sort of response you'll get being a female entrepreneur, especially in the tech. If you're talking to any common man and telling them about what you're doing, I'll give you a very interesting anecdote about this. Their response is different. But if you're talking to a student and you're an educator who's a woman and leading a company, the response is very different.
So
So I'll
let's have
talk to you about all
examples from
three.
all three. Yeah, let's do
Yeah.
that.
So let's talk about, like, I'll give you a really interesting anecdote. So last year I went to this distance learning and teaching conference that's hosted by the University of Madison, Wisconsin. It's a superb conference. Practitioners from all over the world come and talk about best practices. So obviously, being Edkasa is one of the fast growing education companies in Pakistan. We got invited, and it was a lot of learning. I was very excited. So I'm at the airport in Lahore, and I'm all fully ready to go. And the custom guy stops me, and he's like, "Okay, where are you going?" So I said, "I'm going to the United States." So he said, "Why are you going?" So I said, "Okay, there's this conference," and I explained the background to him. So he said, "Okay, what do you do?" So I said, I'm co-founder of Edkasa. It's a technology company." So he said, "You mean you're a teacher?" So I said, "No, I mean I'm a co-founder of a technology company." And it took him like, I could just tell that he wasn't believing me. He was like, "How can you be that? Like, you're not that old. You're a girl. Like, you're a woman. Like, how can you do something tech, right? Because it's unheard of. You can literally count the number of women who are in the leading technology. Sort of in leadership positions in technology companies in Pakistan. But yes,
I would
women
say
are
not
in the
just in
education
Pakistan.
space.
I would just say not just in Pakistan, around, or even in the
Yeah,
US, it's
around
a
the
big
world.
problem.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you see those kind of encounters, which are like, fairly common, right? Like talking to a customs guy or talking to a security, guard or whoever, just explaining your work. And I didn't want to give him the satisfaction that no, I'm just a school teacher. I mean, school teachers are great, and I am an educator. I am a teacher more than anything, but I'm also a technology, company's owner. So I wanted to drive that point home. It gave me great pleasure. But it just shows you this kind of stereotypes you will have, that how, what can women do, what should women be doing, what are women doing, that kind of a thing. But for example, if I go to a school and I love talking to my students, I love going to visit our schools, and I love meeting with different students. being in that space as a woman who's leading, that I think has been a strong suit of mine. um, my students have found it easy to connect with me. They trust me with mentorship and guidance and so on. So I think that's been a strength that I've leveraged. But even personally, if I think about it, you do see a bit of second guessing. Like as a woman, you put down a suggestion, you see that sometimes it's taken seriously, sometimes not, so you kind of sometimes think twice, that this thing I'm advocating, is should I keep advocating at it, because there is a bit of hesitance that you need. And especially when it comes to financials, like you're talking to an investor, you're talking, and Edkasa is a social impact company, right? And I love talking about the impact of it because it means a lot to me. But sometimes when you're talking to an investor and you're talking about social outcomes, they'll be like, "Aap NGO hai," and you're like, "I'm not an NGO. I am a private limited company, but this matters to me." Like, and there are lots of very successful companies all over the world which are doing, you know, which are doing impact work and doing them, profitably. So you can do both. So I feel like there are times when I have to change the rhetoric that I'm using around different stakeholders, and then put on sort of different hats.
Yeah, no, I mean it's complicated, right? And like even with investors, like it's changing slowly, where there is a conversation, at least for public limited companies and big CEOs, in terms of is your responsibility just to the shareholder, and business 101 will teach you that yes, it is.
Yeah,
But increasingly there are
yeah,
shareholders that are demanding that you have more of an impact beyond shareholders, and you measure stakeholder impact as part of your vision and mission as a company, because just delivering profits and having $1 trillion in share buybacks is no longer enough. um, whether it's for society or for your own shareholders, because they're activist in nature and they want to somehow catalyze change in whatever area they want, right? So I'm guessing at some point in Pakistan there will be that conversation as well, and you're at the cutting edge of it, so that's great. But I think again, like technology entrepreneurship and the role of women, right, is still one of those things that people don't put it together. And
yeah,
again, you're driving the shift in that conversation. So I would personally just say, like, don't let them have the satisfaction of thinking that you are just a teacher or whatever. I think it's
yeah,
important to explain that no, you are a technology entrepreneur, and that you're not just a teacher. And
yeah,
a woman can be a technology entrepreneur and lead
absolutely.
an organization. So I want to, conclude by the last couple of questions on this same topic. So, there are a lot of aspiring younger women and men, but I would like you to speak more to women here and young girls who want to do something on their own, and, want to become an entrepreneur or have a vision of where they want to be 5 years, 10 years from now. What would your advice be within the Pakistani cultural context to them in terms of how do they go about achieving their dreams?
Uzair, I think first is a lot of sort of reflection on what you really want to do. I was very purpose driven. I knew very clearly that I wanted to work in the education space. And once you are very aligned with what you want to do, then work doesn't even seem like work. It seems more of something that is fueling you and taking you forward, propelling you forward, gives you a lot of innate intrinsic energy. So one thing is like, what really excites you. So find that one thing that really excites you that you're ready to commit to. I think that should be like the biggest sort of roadmap that helps you decide what to do. Second thing is take stock of what you know and what you need to know. I think that's really important in life to really not be shy in thinking about what you don't know. And be very clear of what you know as well. Like I think a lot of times girls, and I've seen myself do this as well, I'll feel like, okay, I don't know these 15 things, and I just know, like, I'll forget about what the things I know. So I'll actually quote a really interesting study. It shows that the study that Linda Babcock conducted, she's an author and writes amazing books, and her books have really left a mark on me around women and negotiations. So she mentioned about how if there's like a job description, right, that's put out, if you're a woman and looking at it and you know 80% of the things and you don't know 20% of the things, you are less likely to apply to it,
Hmm.
because you'll focus on the 20% of the things you don't know, as opposed to a man who may know 50% of the things and 50% not, but he'll focus on the things he knows and says, oh, I'm a perfect fit, and he's going to apply. So technically you can be more qualified, but you're going to feel like you don't know that. You second guess your own self. So you need to be wary of these sort of internal biases that you may have. You don't even know you have them, but you will. I mean, I got exposed to them after reading a lot of Linda Babcock's work and actually taking courses with her as well. So just know your biases, know your strengths, and know your weaknesses, and don't worry about finding how you can bridge those weaknesses, because obviously there is just natural, it's just human. And don't worry, like I feel like a lot of people shy away from technology, a lot of people shy away, and women especially, from financials. Like get into it, really understand how the profit and loss statement works, the balance sheets works, how cash flows are key if you want to do your own thing. Like understand how cash flows are done, structured, planned, all of that. So those things sort of really help you be systematic, like take a systematic approach to it. And look out for like mentors. I think it goes a long way to see how somebody has done something you wish to do, something like that you wish to do. Pick up a biography, read about it, see how they. I mean, everybody has obstacles. Everybody has to create their own course. So how did they do it? Like draw inspiration from that. So that's helped me so far in pushing boundaries. Um, and another thing is, like, I think like for me, I when I started managing a team, like Edkasa has a team of 18 people, and a lot of them are women, a lot of them are men as well. I did feel like it's at times I had to um, what I started doing when I felt like a man wasn't listening to me was I'd prompt, another member of the team to say, who's a man, and say, can you please talk to him? He's not really listening to me. But then I realized that that's not really the right approach. Like if somebody's not listening to you, taking you seriously because of gender, you need to call them out and say, you need to take me seriously. You committed to something, you have to get it done. Like it doesn't matter who it's coming from. It's a commitment you made. So you need to honor it. So I changed my tactic. Initially, I would leave that work. I'll say, okay, no, I don't want to bother myself with it. But you have to stand up for yourself rather than make somebody else do your work for you. So these kind of things just keep coming, and you just have to be conscious. And I'm sure there's a bunch of things I'm not conscious of right now that I will be maybe in a few years' time. So
Do do you think that that latter part, right, of wanting someone else to speak on your behalf is then also connected to the stuff you mentioned around that women shying away from, job applications, that they may be 80% qualified while men are trained to be good at BSing or winging it, as one would call it, right? So do you think that is connected to the fact that in that room, in that environment, you're less willing to speak up because somehow you're more cautious about, you know who you are and whether you will come across as someone who's knowledgeable or not?
yeah, it does come down to self-confidence is there and a comfort zone. It's traditionally being brought up in Pakistan, your comfort zone isn't to be very, like, as a woman, to be very aggressive and always say your mind and so on. And it's not just Pakistan. I feel like all the time women are more cautious than men. Um, so so you have to sort of get out of your comfort zone, and if just stick to it principally. Like just know this is principally not right, and that's what matters more than anything else. It shouldn't come down to, oh, how I shouldn't, like, for example, I'd worry if I have to scold someone, what kind of tone should I use? If I have to ask somebody to give me work and they're not doing it, I'll think about, okay, what kind of tone should I use? What kind? No, it comes down to principle. Like take a principle stance and correct it, and be
Yeah.
confident about it because you're in the right. Like if you're not confident about it because you're not in the right, then that's a separate thing. But if you're in the right, you should have confidence around it. So I think it is definitely a game of confidence and not overthinking, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the overthinking part is interesting, and this cuts across genders, I think, as well, right? Because a lot of times I'm thinking to myself, if I'm writing an email or making a point to
Yeah,
someone in a meeting or want to make a point in a meeting, um, I have 10 things to do, and I don't want five of those things to be about what is it that I need to do to structure this comment that is the sixth thing on my list to do it properly, right? It's just like you have other things to do, and it's like sometimes
yeah,
you gotta say, okay, I'm going to make that point, and rather than spend 5 hours thinking about how
yeah,
to, yes, if it's a board meeting or if it's a meeting to a
yeah,
CEO or someone really important, yes, you want to spend that time and prepare. I'm not saying don't prepare, but often I think people, especially younger people, in particular women, but I think even men tend to do that, is when you're junior, you spend an inordinate amount of time making sure that you say something exactly the right way, and then edit, and it's like just get it done and like get it over with. It's better
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, for me, managing a team of 18, that was new, right? And I had to um, really give myself that kind of confidence that I know how to handle this, and it's worked out really well. Like I have a really good team that I'm very proud of at Edkasa, and these teachers have been with me for the last 2 years or so. But it did take some time to getting used to, for sure.
Yeah. Like, I was talking to him and he is someone that he was like, I have to let go of some people and lay them off because of what's happened, because of coronavirus. And I was just thinking to myself, like, at some point when he's done with it, because right now he's going through that process, I want to ask him about how did he do that? Because I've never laid off people. I'm
Yeah,
not in that position, right? But at some point in my career, I will
yeah,
be. Hopefully, not as many times, but
yeah,
it's just a fact of life that you will have to let go of people for certain situations. But you can learn from your mentor about things you do and things you don't. And in fact, when you have that conversation with them, they may even think of things that being like, oh, I should have done this differently, and that's a way to improve, right?
yeah,
So I think mentors are key also, not just because they guide you about your career, but you can learn from them about things that you may actually have to do 3 4 5 years from now. And I think that that's key to learn about that stuff. Just as
I
before we
agree.
conclude, you mentioned learning and knowing what you don't know. So in sticking to that theme, what are 2 or 3 books that you would recommend, whether it's on entrepreneurship or on edtech, that people should read and pay attention to?
So I love reading. It's my favorite go-to thing. So I do like a book a week. I really, really enjoy reading. So it's really hard for me to narrow down to just a couple. But earlier we were talking about women and negotiation. So there's a really good book that I would encourage men, women, everybody to read it. It's called Ask for It. It's geared towards more of a gender narrative on how women can use the power of negotiation. Um, Traditionally women are not as good negotiators as men, it turns out in through research and so on. But that's a really good book. Ask for it, like super recommended. A second book, which is more strategy and technology, is Hooked. And it really explains to you how to create a user-centric product in the technology space, the different sort of levers and things to pull and push, and really understand who your user is. I said that book was really helpful for me. So these two books I do recommend. Third, I love reading biographies. So, I mean, I can't recommend those because that totally depends on the interest of people, what kind of personalities they like to follow. So
No, but what's
that's up
the
to each
most
user.
impactful biography that you've read?
Actually, so the three that are coming to my mind. I actually really like this biography by Sting. The musician. He's written a stellar biography. It's not a very known book, but it's a really good book. I really enjoyed because he talks about how he came from Ireland and there was a lot of poverty and how the community sort of looked after one another given the scarcity of resources and how he transcended all of that to become what he is now. So that was an amazing, very inspiring book. The second one, I really enjoyed Trevor Noah's book as well. Again, there were parts of it that were relatable, with his childhood. Um, and the third one that's making the waves these days is Michelle Obama's. I think that was a really good book too. So these three have really inspired me in different ways.
Yeah, Michelle Obama's been making the waves. I haven't read the book, but I've seen the
Yeah,
Netflix special that she has on, and it was fascinating. And we were watching it, and Lauren, my wife, and I were like, she was especially was like, I want her to run for president, but I know she will never because she hates
yeah,
being in the public spotlight. So, no, that is an
yeah,
inspiring book, and what she's achieved, as a woman of color is phenomenal. So,
yeah,
thank you so much for
absolutely.
joining. It was great having a discussion with you about Edkasa and entrepreneurship and mentorship. So thank you for taking out the time. Please stay safe. I know there's a lot going on in
Yeah.
Pakistan with coronavirus. So take care of yourself and your family, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks so much,